Calgary company hopes its new computer card will help fight the so-called Y2K problem.
The company believes it has the only quick fix for the millennium bug.
In the aughts, computers are getting more and more entrenched in day-to-day life. With processing power no longer an obstacle, creatives are now free to bring any idea to life. Computer graphics are at a stage where nearly everything is possible. 2D animation is mixed with 3D, music videos embrace new techniques and styles, and movies enter their era of invisible effects. Even though the results aren't always perfect, the level of experimentation is at an all-time high. This is the story of the people and technologies that defined modern computer graphics and transformed the way we experience art and entertainment.
Now, our last Scientific and Engineering Award goes to ZBrush Software. Where you at, ZBrush?
In 2013, the Academy awarded ZBrush founder Ofer Alon the Scientific and Engineering Award. But at the time of ZBrush's release, no one, perhaps not even its creator, could have imagined what it would grow into. When the first version was released in 2000, ZBrush had a problem. It was a product difficult to categorize and unlike any other application on the market. It was this weird mix of 2D and 3D, and because it lacked many of today's key features, ZBrush felt more like a hobbyist tool, something to play with before graduating to a proper 3D application. Looking back at reviews from that era, it's clear that many struggled to pin down exactly what ZBrush was. Some saw it mainly as a painting tool, while others couldn't quite make sense of it at all. Still though, the enthusiasm for this strange new software was unmistakable. Macworld did a better job describing the application, but without testing it firsthand, it was still difficult to understand how it worked. I can't stress enough how out of left field ZBrush was. Everything from the interface to what the application was actually doing felt completely foreign. Obscure terms like pixel certainly didn't make things any easier. Aside from inspiring the company's name, a pixel is essentially a pixel with depth and material information. Despite ZBrush's wackiness, some of the users could see the potential. The idea of manipulating a 3D surface like clay without worrying about topology or any other technical restrictions was extremely exciting. But this was still the beginning, so things were rough around the edges. Since then, ZBrush's feature set has expanded a lot. One thing, however, hasn't changed, and that's how people feel about ZBrush's interface. Even back then, every single review highlighted the weirdness of the interface. 3D World magazine, in its November 2000 issue, dedicated an entire paragraph criticizing it. The interface was even listed as one of the cons in the rating summary. CGI, another magazine of the era, went so far as to advise users to run the supplied ZScript tutorials, just to understand how ZBrush's interface worked. 20 years after, and this discussion is still going on. Ofer Alon was instrumental in shaping the early ZBrush community. On forums, under the username Pixelator, he personally jumped in to share tips, answer questions, and tease new features. For users and for anyone remotely interested in the program, this was invaluable. It felt like having a direct line to the development team. Today, that kind of direct connection is often obscured by layers of middle management and community managers. Another equally important factor that helped ZBrush immensely was the fact that Alon was not only the creator, but also a user of the program. By showcasing his own images, he demonstrated what ZBrush could do while also seeing where it could improve. And very soon after version 1, ZBrush improved incredibly fast. Once Pixelogic leaned into the idea of creating 3D models with digital clay, ZBrush's toolset and user base exploded. Version 1.5, with the addition of Z-spheres, was a step in the right direction, but with version 2 in 2004, ZBrush took the industry by storm. Key features like the ability to export normal and displacement maps unlock the ability for incredibly detailed sculpts that could then be integrated into standard 3D pipelines. Artists were no longer bogged down by technical limitations and restrictions in polygons or topology. Instead, they could now focus on the fundamentals of art: form, anatomy, and storytelling. For the first time, artists who were used to sketchbooks, paint, or clay could sit down in front of a computer and feel at home. ZBrush's interface was completely alien, but the core experience, picking up a brush and pushing, pulling, or carving into a surface, felt natural.
For me, as coming from a more traditional background as a sculptor for so many years, it was one of the tools that I actually really gravitated towards because of the ease. It was a digital clay, something that, before there was nothing like it.
It also meant that the concepting and modeling process happened in one organic and trouble-free way. Before ZBrush, if you wanted to create a detailed creature, you would have to first model it in clay, scan it, and then go through the process of creating an optimized version of the model. With ZBrush, all these steps were no longer necessary. Once VFX studios saw that, adoption spread quickly. By the mid to late 2000s, ZBrush had become a fixture in VFX and game studios, and even more traditional fields like jewelry. Of course, not everything was smooth sailing. For ZBrush to handle production scale assets, a rewrite was needed. ZBrush 3, released in 2007, was a major update, but it also meant that for quite some time the Mac and PC versions were out of sync. This was extremely frustrating to the community, especially considering the fact that Pixelogic gave little to no updates. Still, despite these growing pains, the promise of a digital sculpting tool outweighed the drawbacks. For quite some time, ZBrush had no real competition. That changed with Mudbox. Compared to ZBrush, Mudbox looked like a regular 3D application, and as a result, it was easier to pick up. For a while, it seemed like Mudbox could become a serious rival. In fact, Autodesk thought so too. They acquired the software in 2007 and integrated it into their ecosystem. But despite Autodesk's backing, Mudbox never managed to capture ZBrush's market. Part of it was timing. By the time Mudbox arrived, ZBrush had already established itself as the go-to sculpting tool. Studios had built pipelines around it, artists had invested years mastering its quirks, and Pixelogic kept releasing powerful new features at a blistering pace, all while giving away updates for free. This was another thing that set Pixelogic apart. You could purchase ZBrush once and keep getting major new features without ever paying again. No annual subscription, no maintenance fees, no costly upgrade cycles. For artists, this was a dream, especially considering the major features added over the years. This policy built enormous goodwill. At the same time, this also meant Pixelogic wasn't capturing ongoing revenue. It relied only on new purchases. This approach worked fine for almost 2 decades, but eventually, the realities of software development caught up. In late 2021, Pixelogic announced that they had been acquired by Maxon, the company behind Cinema 4D. For many artists, it felt like the end of an era, and in many ways it was. Just a few weeks later, Maxon announced the new subscription model for ZBrush. Pixelogic's original pricing model was both a blessing and a curse. It won them incredible loyalty and helped ZBrush dominate its niche, but by refusing to charge for upgrades, they limited their long-term independence. Today, ZBrush is the industry standard for digital sculpting. What started out as a strange 2.5D painting program has become an essential part of every major studio's pipeline.
And here is what it all comes down for me. The core motivation. It's just sheer passion for the topic of 3D computer graphics and animation. It's the magic of being a wizard and the master of your own universe. It was always about that.
Ton Roosendahl is the mind behind Blender, the 3D software that, despite being free, is every bit as capable as expensive commercial alternatives. Blender started off in the mid-90s as an in-house tool for Ton's animation studio Neo Geo. When the company got sold, Ton decided to keep Blender, determined to continue its development. By the late 90s, Blender was running on several platforms: Silicon Graphics, Linux, and Windows. In these early days, the user base was tiny. It was actually the early aughts when Blender's journey truly began. In 2000, after securing financing from several investors, Roosendahl quickly expanded from a two-man team into a company of 50 employees. But when the dot-com bubble burst and sales numbers fell short, investors grew uneasy about backing a product that hadn't yet gained any traction. They withdrew their support, and Blender as a commercial product was essentially dead. Ton wouldn't be able to keep working on the product because in an effort to make the software viable, he had given up most of his ownership. Roosendahl, though, wasn't ready to give up. He proposed a one-time buyout fee that would allow the software to be released as open source, free for anyone to use, modify, and distribute. The investors agreed on a price of 100,000 euros, and by the summer of 2002, the quest to raise the money began.
I will do a campaign online to collect money from the users, and I will get you 100,000 euros as a license to make Blender open source.
Roosendahl launched what became one of the first major crowdfunding campaigns. The response was extraordinary. In just 7 weeks, the Blender community raised the entire amount, and by fall of 2002, Blender was officially released under the GNU General Public License. Blender's development happens in two lanes, and this, I believe, is what truly made Blender a success. Alongside the Blender Foundation, responsible for Blender's development, Ton founded the Blender Institute in 2007. Its mission? To produce movies, games, and animations that not only promote Blender, but also push the software forward through real-world production. And back then, Blender had a lot of room for improvement. Not so much in features, but in usability. Anyone who used Blender back then knows how notoriously difficult it was to learn. The interface followed its own logic, ignoring the conventions of other 3D software of the time. In a way, Blender still carried the legacy of programs of the 90s, where every application did things its own way. Because of that, many dismissed Blender as too weird or impossible to learn. Thankfully, Ton and his team recognized the issue, and throughout the mid to late aughts, they began the gradual process of making Blender more approachable. A process that gained momentum thanks to the buzz generated by Blender's open movie projects.
The machine is like clockwork. One move out of place and you're ground to a pulp.
The shorts were beautiful to look at, excellent from a technical point of view, but most importantly, they shaped Blender's development. Elephant's Dream, for example, improved Blender's animation and compositing. Big Buck Bunny, on the other hand, pushed advanced hair and character animation. By the end of the decade, Blender had all the right ingredients for success. A solid and growing feature set, an interface that was steadily improving, and of course its killer feature, the price tag. Totally free. Ton and his dedicated team of developers and artists managed to transform Blender from a quirky 3D app most people avoided into a piece of software that could easily compete with applications costing thousands of dollars per year. Today, Blender's feature set is better than ever. You can model, render, animate, even edit your own videos without having to use other tools like Premiere or Final Cut. The true testament of what Blender is capable of came in 2025, when Flow, a film created entirely in Blender, won an Oscar for Best Animated Feature.
Thank you to the Academy, thank you to Sideshow and Janus, thank you to Blender, thank you to my mom and dad, thank you to my cats and dogs. I'm really moved by the warm reception our film has had, and I hope that it will open a lot of doors to independent animation filmmakers around the world. This is the first time a film from Latvia has ever been nominated, so it really means a lot to us. We are very inspired, and we hope to be back soon.
Blender shows no signs of slowing down, and I for one hope it continues to thrive long after Rosendahl passes the baton to the next generation.
We need to focus on a segment that we can, make a difference, and the right size, a true segment we can get to, we can service, that appreciates us. Could be games, could be Japan. You have to kind of go through this thing, and it ended up being that high-end film effects.
SideFX has a long history in the computer graphics world. The founders, Kim Davidson and Greg Ermanovich, started the company in '87 after leaving Omnibus. If that name rings a bell, that's because we covered it in the '80s episode of the series when talking about Omnibus purchasing Digital Productions and Robert Abel and Associates. As is always the case with VFX Studios, the company grew too fast, it got overextended, and by '87 it collapsed. This led Davidson and Ermanovich to start SideFX. The first product that came out of the company was Prisms, a collection of utilities for modeling, animation, and rendering.
So Greg Hermanovic and I said, okay, let's just the two of us scrape some nickels together and put a bid in for the software we'd written at Omnibus, and keep on going and see what we can do. And at least we could I could phone up and get jobs from advertising agencies and do the animation. And sometimes I'd write code at night, but mostly it was Greg writing all the time and me doing mostly animation and some code, storyboards, that kind of bids on jobs.
Prisms ran on SGI machines, and it quickly became popular in VFX houses thanks to its flexibility. It was one of the very first systems to take a procedural approach to computer graphics. By the mid-90s, SideFX decided to repackage its technology into a cleaner product, and in late '96, Houdini was released. Unlike Prisms, Houdini unified all of these smaller applications into one environment. During the 90s, procedural workflows were a niche idea, and Houdini was seen as powerful but intimidating compared to other 3D applications. As VFX though grew more complex and the demand for very elaborate effects grew bigger, Houdini quickly became the go-to tool for any type of simulation. After all, the aughts were the decade of large-scale spectacle. Houdini became the secret weapon for making shots like these possible, and because everything was node-based, directors could request changes late in the game, and artists didn't have to start over. They could just adjust the recipe. This also meant that 3D artists could create unique effects that didn't necessarily conform to the real world, but looked cool nonetheless. The disintegration effect done with Lightwave in the first Blade movie was now upgraded on the second film with the help of Houdini. Everyone who watched that movie back then talked about these sequences non-stop, probably more than the actual movie.
We are proud to present Mark Ayland and SideFX Software with an Academy Award of Merit.
Houdini has been honored multiple times by the Academy with the Scientific and Technical Award, recognizing its groundbreaking procedural technology and lasting impact on visual effects. Houdini is not a tool where you can just dive in and start experimenting, but if you can master it, you'll be able to do anything your heart desires. By the end of the aughts, Houdini had secured its place in Hollywood, a proven solution whose influence would only continue to expand in the years ahead.
When Terminator 2 came out, and I saw that in the movies for the first time, I realized that as a filmmaker, I had to get involved in this new technology because otherwise I was going to be left behind. I mean, this was an incredible tool, you know.
Weta is a company that defied all expectations. Based in New Zealand, a country with no prior VFX industry, it has grown into one of the most influential studios in the field. Founded in 1993, Weta was originally established to provide effects for Peter Jackson's films.
The genesis of Weta Digital was Heavenly Creatures. Peter Jackson was working on that film. It would be 1993, 1994. One of Peter's associates at the time, a gentleman named George Port, did some investigation into the cost of digital visual effects and went to Peter and in very Kiwi fashion said, well, we don't really have to pay for these visual effects elsewhere. We'll just do this stuff ourselves. We'll buy a couple of pieces of equipment and do the effects ourselves. And so they went out and bought an SGI workstation and a couple of pieces of software. They bought a film scanner, a film recorder, and bang, your visual effects facility.
Heavenly Creatures and The Frighteners offered a glimpse of the studio's potential, but those movies were just warm-ups for what came next. In the late 90s, early 2000s, Peter Jackson set out on bringing Tolkien's Lord of the Rings to the big screen. It was a huge undertaking and something many believed could never be done. Until that point in time, trying to create the visuals needed would have been impossible or at best extremely limited.
I think the other key reason that Lord of the Rings can be made today is because of the advances in technology. That obviously with the advent of computer visual effects that really have only come about in the last 7 or 8 years, we are now able to show the images that Tolkien described on screen.
It was clear from the start that designing and portraying the world of Lord of the Rings, along with its epic battles, would be a massive challenge. But having a VFX studio working closely with a director turned out to be a huge advantage. Weta handled the practical effects and props, while Weta Digital took on the computer-generated visuals. In both cases, the company knocked it out of the park. To successfully tell the story on screen, Weta had to push past the limits of existing technology and build entirely new tools to do it. For the large-scale battles across all 3 films, Weta built Massive, a proprietary crowd simulation system.
There's artificial intelligence, which is basically an attempt at emulating the processes of a human mind. But there's also artificial life, which is really more of an inspiration for Massive, which is using natural processes to create lifelike results. In Massive, we try to achieve natural crowd-like behavior, not by controlling a whole crowd, but by creating one agent who will react naturally to his environment. We call them agents because it's a common term in artificial intelligence for a decision-making unit. Then when we put thousands of them together, they will give us an emergent crowd behavior that is also natural, without us having to say how the crowd has to behave.
The studio also used digital doubles for sequences that were difficult or dangerous to film. By scanning the actors and capturing their performances with motion capture, they could bring those moments to life with relative ease. One of the most iconic moments in the trilogy, though, has to be Andy Serkis's portrayal of Gollum. This performance perfectly illustrates what can be achieved when an actor's talent is combined with the skills of artists and major advances in technology.
And the Oscar goes to...
And the Oscar goes to...
And the Oscar goes to...
Jim Riegel, Randall William Cook, Richard Taylor, and Mark Stetson for The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring.
The trilogy earned Weta 3 consecutive Academy Awards for Best Visual Effects. Lord of the Rings, though, was just the beginning. A few years later, in 2009, Weta got to test its limits with another incredibly demanding production. Avatar's plot may be as flat as a piece of cardboard, but the technical artistry and visuals are on a whole other level. Weta delivered over 1,800 shots for the film, with a team of around 900 artists and technicians. That level of commitment is clear on every frame of the movie. With most of the characters being CG, Cameron faced a major challenge: directing the performances.
It took us from 2005 to 2007 to get the performance capture system up and running and proven to work in a way that neither diluted nor augmented the actor's performance.
To solve this, Weta developed a new pipeline. Full body suits and head-mounted cameras captured facial and body performances with incredible accuracy. Quite a jump in quality over the facial capture system that was used just a few years earlier on Lord of the Rings. The Navi rigs themselves were also highly advanced. Weta built detailed muscles and tissue systems capable of showcasing all the details from the data captured earlier. The results set new industry standards, and Avatar won the Academy Award for Best Visual Effects in 2010. Avatar and Lord of the Rings would be enough bragging rights on their own, but Weta worked on several more productions during that period. Peter Jackson's King Kong, iRobot, and District 9 are just a few of the movies Weta worked on at the time. By the late 2000s, Weta had joined ILM and Digital Domain at the very top of the VFX world, working on projects of massive scale and complexity.
I think CEOs and leaders need to be comfortable with ambiguity. This ambiguity is important to be comfortable with, I guess. And I think that all CEOs that are very successful are comfortable with ambiguity. And I am very comfortable with ambiguity.
Nvidia was founded in '93, but like many startups, its first few years were rocky.
Every company makes mistakes, and I make a lot of them. And some of them puts the company in peril, especially in the beginning.
In those early days, Nvidia made a bet that didn't quite pan out. At the time, the industry hadn't fully settled on 3D standards. Nvidia invested in 3D graphics using quads, and its hardware was built around that approach. But as competitors and APIs like Direct3D standardized on triangles, Nvidia's early hardware quickly fell out of step with the rest of the industry. That decision nearly bankrupted the company. But in '96, after drastic layoffs and a necessary pivot to industry standards, Nvidia finally had a hit on its hands: the Riva 128 graphics accelerator. Back then, there were no dedicated GPUs handling the entire graphics pipeline. Many graphics operations were still done on the CPU. Graphics accelerators like Nvidia's or those from its biggest rival, 3DFX, were responsible only for specific tasks, such as accelerating 3D graphics.
Brian, you guys have a 3D accelerator card called the Voodoo, or the Voodoo 2 now, I guess is what we're using. What does a 3D accelerator card do for me? Why should I buy one and put it in my PC?
Well, the 3D accelerator allows you to offload the graphics functions from the Pentium and the 2D card, and so you have a dedicated graphics processor which can give you better frame rates and better special effects.
All right, now NFL Blitz, which you're loading up right now, is a hot game. We've seen it in the arcades. Everybody's playing this thing and dumping the quarters in there right now. And this is what it would look like on a PC with a 3D card.
Yeah.
Which is pretty darn good.
As graphics became more demanding, a new approach was needed. Nvidia's first true GPU, the GeForce 256, arrived in 1999. It integrated transform and lighting operations directly into the hardware, offloading more and more work from the CPU. However, software had to be written specifically to take advantage of the hardware. So in those early days, if the CPU was fast enough, it could still deliver better performance than the GeForce 256. Even though the card was outsold by Nvidia's competitor 3DFX, it was still a major success for the company. And when the 2000s came around, the company began stacking up one success after another. Nvidia acquired 3DFX, which by then was only a shadow of its former self. It became the GPU vendor for Microsoft's Xbox, and it also co-developed the GPU for Sony's PlayStation 3. Nvidia was famous for its impressive demos meant to showcase what the hardware could do. These would play non-stop on every computer store display, and if you were a kid at the time, you could spend hours just watching or interacting with them.
Our argument is that the CPU is important. You can't do without it. But where we want to take the future of computing, the GPU is going to do the job.
The major breakthrough for Nvidia came in 2006 with CUDA, or as Charlie Rose would say, CUDA.
Tell me about CUDA technology.
We actually called it CUDA. CUDA is an architecture of parallel computing.
Right.
And this is a fabulous story. This is those two doctors and a few scientists at Stanford saw that our GPU was programmable and could be used almost like a supercomputer. And they tried to use it, and it was incredibly hard to use. But if they were successful in using it, it delivered extraordinary speedups. And so, in working with them, we decided to take the big plunge that we would make our GPU much, much more like a general purpose processor and could be used for far more than graphics, far more than 3D, that it could be used for general purpose mathematics computing.
CUDA opened the door for developers to tap into the GPU's hardware for all kinds of computing tasks. Scientific simulations, video processing, even the first wave of machine learning. And for 3D artists, one of these tasks was rendering. Back then, 3D rendering was still handled by the CPU. The more cores you had, the faster it went, but it was still a painfully slow process. With CUDA and Nvidia's efficient high-performance cores, rendering suddenly got a massive boost. One of the first GPU renderers to come out was Octane, and its performance was shocking. Not only were renders faster, but for the first time, artists could preview how a scene would look like as they adjusted materials, lighting, or any other parameter. It was a huge step forward, and the difference in quality compared to renders from just a few years ago was massive. With immediate feedback, artists could now improve their scenes without having to wait for noisy previews or clean but slow renders. By 2010, Nvidia had become one of the world's biggest GPU providers. It had successfully transitioned from a company producing graphics accelerators for games to highly programmable GPUs capable of handling virtually any task. Today, Nvidia is at the forefront of AI, providing the computing power needed to train and run modern AI models.
Hey, buddy, buy Nvidia.
This is a 200 and 200 megahertz. When I got this, like only 9 months ago, it was the fastest notebook computer in the world.
The aughts were the decade when computing was no longer a hindrance. Rapid advances in both hardware and software cleared away many of the old barriers for creators. This opened the door to a wave of ambitious projects, especially in film, where directors and studios were both willing and able to experiment with technology on a massive scale. Movies, though, that push the envelope from a technical standpoint are not usually great films by traditional standards. Transformers, The Polar Express, Final Fantasy are some of the first that come to mind, and I don't think they're on anyone's favorite list. They're absolutely incredible achievements that push the limits of what was possible, but there's no amount of money that would make me want to rewatch Transformers anytime soon. In some ways, it's understandable. Something's gotta give. When you're breaking barriers, you can't focus equally on every single aspect of a film. So, inevitably, some areas will suffer. Thankfully, this constant technological evolution, combined with the obsession of certain directors, has given us films that might be CG heavy, but not at the detriment of the plot or the final product.
But what I'm saying is, if you're Chinese on a dolly and you push it into it, I mean, isn't it the same thing?
David Fincher is one of those directors. His movies are full of CG effects, but they always serve the story. They're not meant to be the main dish.
So all the moves in the title sequence are done that way. There's no actual moves in there. It was a money thing. You know, we didn't have the money, but David liked it so much. So they did this smart thing.
Take Panic Room, for example. In that film, Fincher wanted the audience to always know where each character was inside the house. As a result, all the sequences using CG serve that purpose. Aside from a few flashy moments like the camera passing through impossible spaces, most of the effects show a lot of restraint and never draw attention to themselves. With each year, we see Fincher becoming more ambitious and confident with VFX shots. Just 5 years after Panic Room, Fincher came back with Zodiac in 2007. The film is full of VFX shots, and without behind-the-scenes footage showing how the movie was made, it would be almost impossible to distinguish the real elements from the CG. Alfonso Cuarón is another one of these directors. His 2006 film, Children of Men, is a perfect example of a great movie filled to the brim with CG shots. From digital set extensions to fully CG characters and compositing tricks, everything is designed to enhance the story and pull the audience deeper into this dystopian world. From the aughts onward, we see this happening more and more. As computing became cheaper and software more powerful, the technology moved further into the background, often to the detriment of VFX artists and the industry. We now have films that pretend everything was shot practically, even though much of it is CG enhanced.
So the whole time I was shooting the virtual camera, I was complaining that it wasn't live action. The whole time I was doing the live action, I was complaining that it wasn't CG. By the time I got back to doing virtual production again, after the live action, I just kept my mouth shut.
Virtual production is very much a product of the leaps in processing power that only became available from the aughts onward. This technique combines several technologies like performance capture, virtual cameras, game engines, and a host of previs tools. But in the early aughts, many of these tools didn't even exist, and those that did were still in a primitive state. One of the first films to use virtual production tools was Spielberg's Artificial Intelligence all the way back in 2001. In the film's Rouge City sequence, the actors had to walk through an environment full of futuristic buildings, neon lights, and elaborate decorations. The real set consisted of little more than a blue screen and a handful of props. No matter how capable or imaginative a director might be, shooting a sequence like that is tricky. So ILM devised a setup that allowed Spielberg to frame the scene and visualize the final sequence as he was shooting it. Through a monitor, Spielberg could see a rough version of the city, and the actors composed it on top. The technology was still in its infancy, and the setup had its limitations, but it got the job done. Around the same time, Weta had to devise a different approach for Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. Jackson's sequences were far more elaborate. The cave troll sequence, for example, had to sync a mix of live actors, a CG character, along with digital doubles for some of the characters. Once all of these elements were prepared, the team packed everything into a single sequence. Then Jackson, with the help of VR goggles and a simple stick standing in for a camera, was able to pick his shots. Seeing Jackson's setup today, it's clear how early we were in that technology. The whole system feels clunky, with cables constantly in the way, and the crew carefully trying not to step over them. The final result, though, is still impressive.
And this is what everyone will look like on the day. This is how you'll be acting. And these are the receptors.
These are all cameras.
Everything, they're receptors. Receptors, right. They're basically flooding this area with infrared light and picking up the movement of the dots.
Depending on the type of movie, directors and VFX studios had to experiment with different approaches. Beowulf in 2007, for example, was a fully CG production, relying entirely on motion capture data. As a result, they didn't have to use Peter Jackson's technique. Instead, they devised their own. Still though, the process was equally demanding. And along the way, it introduced its own set of issues. To address the dead eyes problem seen in Zemeckis' earlier film, The Polar Express, the team developed a new method that focused on capturing eye movement.
This movie is the first one done with these particular electrodes. These will add a more lifelike quality to the eyes.
Look up. I could use the package. Straight. Look down. Look straight. What we do is we take the measurements of the eye and we take that information and put it into Maya. That way we can get their eye movements when they're working on stage.
The eye has a DC current in it. It's like a battery. And the way that DC current, the eye moves, it affects the current inside your head. And we're able to record that.
Even though the movie still ended up in the Uncanny Valley, it was definitely a big improvement over Polar Express. As for setting up the final shots, the VFX team used a series of gadgets that mimicked real-world systems like cranes and handheld cameras. Beowulf as a movie might not be for everyone, but it's still a remarkable achievement for the time. The real turning point, however, came in 2009 with James Cameron's Avatar. Avatar took the idea of virtual cinematography to the next level. Unlike Beowulf, which recorded actors and assembled everything later, Weta and Cameron came up with a different system that would make filming a more organic process. Simulcam, the system devised specifically for the movie, allowed Cameron to have a setup that would feel more like a real camera. He would look through a monitor and see the shot as it would be in the final render. The actors were rendered as their Navi characters, and Pandora's lush environments would be rendered in a rougher draft form. This real-time feedback gave Cameron the freedom to direct performances and design shots as if he were physically standing in that alien world. For capturing the face, the team also used a different, more refined setup than the one seen in Beowulf. Instead of Beowulf's big markers that took time to put on in the morning and maintain throughout the shoot, Avatar used a more elegant setup, a small camera for the face, and a less intrusive tracking network on the actor's face. Even though the two films were only a few years apart, the difference in quality is immense. Despite Avatar's characters being big blue aliens, they felt more real than the human characters in Beowulf. In Avatar, the actors' performances come through, and you can easily feel their emotions. Avatar's filmmaking process was a huge leap forward for virtual production, and since then, it only got better. Jon Favreau's The Lion King, 10 years after Avatar, is a good example of that. Through the use of the game engine Unity, Favreau could scout the virtual location, add or take out elements, and adjust the environment in real time. He could place lights, set up dollies, and capture shots exactly as he would on a real stage. Unlike Beowulf, which captured only motion data, or Avatar, which still required heavy post-processing, The Lion King gave the crew instant visual feedback. With technology improving so rapidly, the only safe bet is that the next decade will surprise us all. By the end of the aughts, the world of computer graphics is an exciting place to be. Artists are producing their best work yet, studios are testing bold new techniques, and software itself is at a turning point. What once required thousands of dollars for a single license was now becoming affordable, giving more people access to powerful software. In the next episode, we'll explore the 2010s, a decade shaped by real-time rendering, the rise of streaming, and new frontiers like VR and AR. As always, a huge thank you to my patrons. Your support is what keeps projects like this going. If you enjoyed the video and aren't a patron yet, consider subscribing. It's the best way to help me keep making more in-depth content like this. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.